And welcome back to our last track before our keynote. Last track is by Teemu Vesala, who talks about logical security tests with test automation. Teemu is DevOps and DevSecOps consultant in a company called Northcode. During this presentation, he will show you with examples what kind of security test the test automation should do and how to do it at the API level. Teemu, take it away.
Okay, thanks. Okay, in this session, I will talk about security a bit and see what kind of things the security test automation should include. And well, let's start with the first slide. And I really hope that everything's working because I'm generally bug magnet, and in those cases, something is going to suck anyway. So, unfortunately, I couldn't change my slides because this slide is almost same as Jorge Marin had this morning. But well, let's go with this slide. Okay. Some time ago in Finland, I saw the news article, and there was news that two persons were charged by the fraud. And what they had done was that they had bought from big Finnish web store Mac, the most expensive Macs, Apple Macs, with about €5 or something like with minimum price. And during this session, or after this session, you know how they did that. And also, this already shows why logical issues should be tested with test automation. But few words about me. I've got quite long experience at IT industry. Well, 25 years is like, well, at 95 there wasn't cloud, there wasn't many things which are nowadays. And I've been developer, I've been tester, I've been a cloud architect, I've been doing all kind of roles, and I have combined these to under DevSecOps term, and I've ended up to be the consultant because I'm the person who don't like to sit in one place for a long time. I'm also describing myself as pure nerd and tech lover. I love computers. I love all kind of gaming, like tabletop role-playing games and PC games. Currently, I'm at tabletop side. We have been playing Dungeons and Dragons and Star Wars, and at PC gaming, the Fallout 76 and Borderlands 2 and 3. I'm also trying to tell about security for customers and all kind of people. And especially the development time security. And I've started to call this 0-day security. And I'm working at Northcode, where the employees are all owners. So all kind of marketing and sales effort are also bringing some extra income for us. During this session, I'll start with the basic things, that what is security? And this is because usually when I'm talking about security, if I come right away to security issues, people are like, they don't understand why I'm talking about those. And security is actually more mindset than specific test case or one specific test or how to do. Also, I'm telling why the development should, or why we should matter about it at development time and not at the audits. Of course, when I'm talking about API level, then something about applications and what kind of logical issues you should test and what there are. So, what is security? I think that this is the most important slide at the whole presentation. Security is, well, I'm using usually acronym CIA, not as the Central Intelligence Agency, but confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And when you start to think world from these point of views, you start to think also testing a bit differently. And what does this actually mean? Confidentiality is that is the data which is not supposed to be visible for someone such that it's not really visible for that user. And especially at European Union level, this has become more and more important because GDPR is talking a lot about this, and it's also like it's starting to be the business risk. And the data should be confidential for the internal users. So, for example, developers should not see production data in many cases. If there is health tech stuff, then it's patient data, and the developers shouldn't have visibility to those. There's external use, so that some external party can't access to data. But also the third parties like for example, Facebook in modern web applications, because many are using Facebook as the one tracking device. And underlining is that there's privacy regulations like GDPR or HIPAA at US health tech side and so on. Another important part, and especially during the logical testing, is integrity. And integrity is that data is not changed without the data is always the expected data. For example, buying the 2 Max with €3 is definitely not has definitely violated the integrity. And availability is also important because data must be accessible for those who need it, and it should be in real time or when they need it. For example, if the doctor can't access to patient data, then it's not available for him, and it's definitely not timely accessible. And for this reason, we can't lock our data to behind some vault or somewhere where nobody can access it. It's violating this aspect of the security. And why the development should care about it? I'm usually using this slide to show the cost of cloud architecture or system architecture level security. But when we start to think about development time and test automation, it's easy to create the test automation which does the logical checks. And it's easy to check them right away after you have violated those logical rules which are there, like business rules or specific limits or data visibility rules. It's annoying for the security auditor to come to the company and see that, oh, damn, the first thing which I do is that I'm getting the wrong kind of data to the screen, or I can bypass some security controls, or buy the Mac Apple at €2. And when you have to fix the insecure system after the audit, it's always much more expensive than fixing it right away or checking it all the time. Also, why this should be part of the test automation is that software is evolving a lot. And while software is evolving, also the business logic is changing, and developers might, for example, remove some important checks from their code. And this is the basic idea of adding the security tests also to the test automation check. And why the API instead of user interface? Well, in many cases nowadays, the application frontends are created with some framework which has automated validation at the front end. But the backend necessarily don't have these validation rules. And this is the problem. For example, there's many cases that web application is mandating that how we are going through the processes, it enforces you that you can't skip, for example, steps. But when you go to the API level, you can choose your inputs the way you want them to add them. You don't have to follow the user interface rules. For example, I was doing performance testing for one desktop applications long time ago, and I forgot to, from the user interface, I couldn't bypass the authentication. But at the backend, when I was sending data directly to the backend without user interface, I managed to skip some specific steps at the authentication system and realized that, oh damn, I now have access to all data without any kind of real authentication. And there was a lot of really important data. Also, when you are doing the testing at API level, the data is not filtered by the user interface. You can see all the data which is coming in from the system or from the backend. And for example, I was at one project where the backend was using WebSocket to communicate with the front end. And front end was filtering like what it showed for the users. But unfortunately, the backend didn't send only that data which was meant for that customer. So they were sending all kind of data, and there was actually data from all logged in users. But only the front end were filtering the wrong data off. And of course they had to fix that, because if I get data to my computer, I can always sniff it and open it and read what is said inside that. Also, the API level testing is usually less fragile than the user interface testing. That's why I recommend that in many cases that even functional tests are done rather from the API level than from the user interfaces. So what I mean with logical testing and versus scanning, because quite often when we are talking about automated security testing, people start to talk about scanning. And when I'm talking about test automation and security testing, I'm starting to talk about the logical testing where the people are creating manually the test automation. They both have different kind of both have different kind of use. If I use Scanner, which just submits plenty of data to the backend and sees what's coming back and maybe follows the logs and makes decision based to that, is there some error? It's good for many that kind of things which are more like syntax-based security checks. For example, SQL injection or cross-site scripting, or if there is, for example, at web application, if the cookies are insecure or JWT tokens has something wrong. But it doesn't have any idea about business logic and what should be accessible by the users, unless the tool has possibility to suppose that, okay, these URLs are out of the bound of the normal users or unauthenticated user. But when the human starts to do test automation, first, you always know, or most of the time, you know what the results should be. And you also understand the context and business rules and the logic and results. Violating the business logic and business rules are something which can happen very easily in many cases. And for example, the web store example will be about violating the most fundamental business logic of web store, or almost any buying process. Also, when you understand the results, you can see from that if there is data which is not supposed to be there. While the automation just sees that, okay, server is dumping me a lot of JSON data or something else, and I can't do anything for that. I just understand that, okay, this is most likely okay. But as the human, you understand right away that, okay, here's data of some other customer than there is supposed to be, for example. Then there are, I'm always clicking the wrong button because mobile phone has this go forward, and I'm usually hitting the keyboard. Then there's several tools which are helping you with this kind of testing and test planning and test creation. Well, I don't have, showing any of these tools would require plenty of time. But one important tool is Chrome and its developer tools. Because when you press Ctrl-Shift-I, all the web traffic which your browser is doing, and it's really nice for testing and seeing what kind of data is moved between client and server. Then there are external applications like Attack Proxy, which is created by OWASP organization. It's working as the proxy between your browser and the backend. And with it, you can record the data, you can modify it easily, you can do all kind of like static checks, like what kind of cookies there are moving around and so on. And when you start to automate the test, for test automation tool, anything which can do HTTPS requests without browser is okay. For example, if I'd have to do test automation at API level, I'd probably use Robot Framework for that. Because I've used it so much and I know it better than many other framework. But just check your application that is it possible to just send HTTPS requests around. Then another important tool which I'm using when I'm estimating what kind of security risks application has is the API documentation. Well, this is almost always bad news for developers because at that point, when I'm starting to think about it, what kind of documentation there is, usually they answer none. But well, nowadays, luckily, many frameworks have started to produce the documentation, at least semi-automatically. Like, for example, Swagger is telling what kind of parameters the REST API is accepting. And in many cases, it also tells what kind of data types there are. Is it integer or number? Is it string or something else? And if developers just throw a couple lines more that what this API is about, then it would simplify life a lot. And if you have to discuss about this API documentation with developers, and they are saying that, okay, we don't have time to produce this API documentation, then you should ask that how the front end knows what kind of messages you send back and forth. And also, how about the next developer when he comes to project? How does he know what kind of APIs there are and how they should work? Okay, so let's go a bit more practical things like time tracking application. This is every one of us or most of us are using some kind of time tracking application for our work. And especially if you're a consultant, you know that billing application is at least something which you have to use. So there's a few rules which should be followed by this application. An employee can mark sick leaves, add hours and expenses, but not approve. So that is in many cases the normal case that when the employee is he has done some he has some expenses, he submits them to manager and he approves those. Also, for privacy reasons, usually the employees can't see each other's records normally. And those are things which you should check. So, first test is like access control. Can I see your data? This is one of the most fundamental test I usually like to add to the test automation stack, no matter if it's part of the user interface tests or part of the backend tests. So, for example, this is like the API in this case is that get record for ID. And there's a lot of typos in these slides because I couldn't change them last minute. So when you are asking that kind of request from the backend, it should return information about the event if it's your event. And usually, like JWT token is used for the authentication in stateless applications and API cases. And there is, for example, user ID and role inside that token. So Adam and in this example, Adam and Eve are employees. And what kind of test case there is? First, you log in as user Adam. You create the sick leave entry and get the record ID for the entry. And then log in as Eve and get the record with ID. This is one of those situations when there is only a few development frameworks which are enforcing this kind of a rule that only with ID, if you are owner of this record, you can get the record. So that's one reason why you should always test this kind of thing with test automation, and especially if you are running it at API level. Then another issue is that is access control, or is it checked at all? In many cases, when there's a lot of microservices which are communicating to each other, and something which has been internal API at some point has moved to the public API. And that's one reason why I usually say that from security point of view, if you have internal APIs, create some kind of authentication method between those also, so that when you are revealing the API, you don't accidentally create this situation where one previously private API has turned to the public API. And that's why in microservice environment, service mesh applications are used like Linkerd and whatever there are. There are quite many of those, but Linkerd is one of the most popular one. And the test case is quite simple. Log in as user, create a sick leave entry, record the ID for that entry, log out, and get the record with ID. So it's validating that, for example, if the session is still same, it's validating that log out really invalidates the session, and that the ID is not accessed with the invalid session. Also, if you close the session at the meantime and make sure that there isn't any kind of cookies or so on, which are stored from previous steps, then you can check that is it possible to access data without any kind of authentication. Then one important part is that can I accept my expense? In this case, the test case is a bit more complicated. First, there is post message which says that, okay, this is my expense record. Of course, this is not including, for example, cost in this example, but there's anyway some kind of description there, and at the end, the status must be that it's saved and you get some kind of record. And then there is the patch operation, which says that you cannot, that status is moved to the approved. But when you are the team manager, when you are employee, the application should reject this patch situation and say that, okay, you can't save this and approve this. But with team manager, you have to. So let's go to test cases. At left, you can see the normal case, and at the right, you can see the business violation attempt. And I've actually tested one time tracking application, and I managed to do this, what is at right. So this is the real case that the workflow and the business rules are violated. And then to the web store. This is the normal flow of the web store. You have empty cart, you add items to the cart, you go to check out PayPal, and payment is okay. And let's start to violate this somehow. So now this is what happened in Finland. You had empty cart and you started to add items to it. But you go not to normal process and go to the PayPal part. But while the PayPal window is open, you open the different tab and start to add items. And what happens after this is always the question mark. At the Finnish web store, well, they've succeeded with the 5 small payment to buy the max. And as my time goes up, there's also another way to violate the business logic in this. And in some cases, you can even skip the whole system. So for the summary, start to think how the rules and useful tools like state diagrams at planning phase and attack against the APIs. Okay, now the question part. And sorry about the getting busy at the last slides.
No worries. I have only one question. From which web shop I can get these MacBooks?
Hopefully not at any anymore. Well, this was quite normal situation about 5 years ago at many web stores, not just one Finnish store, but almost everyone. And then even testers started to test this, and frameworks fixed the issues also.
Okay. When do you find the time to play all the games? That was the first question. And where do you get the bills?
Well, I'm usually the early bird even the weekends, and I wake up quite early, and my kids are big already, so I have a lot of times at mornings. So if someone wants to start playing with me at, for example, Saturday morning, it's okay at 8 o'clock morning. And my girlfriend wakes up much later than I, so.
Okay. About security logic testing, can this be applied on the requirements level?
Yeah, usually it is that somehow, or yes, you can say at requirements that you have to test also the business logic violations, because these are part of the business logic, which is usually part of requirements. But unfortunately, nowadays, or at the moment, there's a few cases when someone is demanding that, okay, do the test automation for the security tests also. Usually the requirements are saying that test OWASP top 10. And they are more like syntax related and more like package management and upgrade processes related tests or requirements than to think about that how to violate the business rules at test automation.
Okay. Can the security logic test automation, can it be applied on unit test level, or how can it be tied to your building testing process?
Well, I wouldn't put that the unit test level, because unit testing is, well, now I'm talking about code level unit testing, because there's of course different kind of use for that. But what developers are usually testing at unit test level, it can't test these kind of process-based or business rules, because there's a lot of more like inside data than at the unit test is. Unit tests can violate all kind of rules easily because they can fake the parameters and so on. But is it possible to done through the API is more important. So this is more like integration tests or even functional tests when you have to do end-to-end testing for the whole business logic.
Okay. How do you see the similarities and differences between security testing and penetration testing?
Well, usually the penetration testing is bigger issue and bigger topic. It's like Well, if someone is doing penetration testing, he goes through the infrastructure. He might do social engineering attacks and all kind of even non-technical things. But in this kind of, and usually it's at the audit phase. So it's more like auditing and post-development time thing. But in this case, I think that the test automation is brought to the development time. And it's done like when new feature or business logic is implemented, these tests are starting right away rolling there. And they are trying to violate the business logic all the time. And when the CI pipeline is running, this is one part of the testing. So this is
Okay.
like application level, not infrastructure level stuff, which is key for penetration testing many times.
Okay, thanks. Do you still recommend separating so-called general API automation projects from security API automation projects, or combining them in one?
Well, I would put them to one because in that case you can like group them easier. For example, you have end-to-end shopping experience. That you have several test automation for that. It goes through the whole pipeline, and at the end you get that okay, this is done correctly in good cases. But then when you have these at the same package, these other tests which are related to security and violating the business rules, and which are attempting to do that, it's likely that when you are changing the pipeline, you also upgrade these tests at the same time because they are part of the normal end-to-end tests.
Okay. You focused heavily on API security testing, but what about database schema securities, UI securities, transport layer securities, etc.?
Well, they are part of the world, but at the test automation, I don't think that they are not so important. Of course, you have to understand the security when you are developing the system, and of course, depending of my audience, it's what I'm concentrating to because usually I'm talking to the like cloud architects and AWS people and so on, and at that I'm more concentrating to infrastructure level security and for example network security and stuff like that. But because security is so broad, and when I'm thinking that what kind of topics are good for Nordic testing days, going to the API level is probably the best in this case because many of you already seen how to do front-end testing, and many of you already do the basic like no cross-site scripting or find cross-site scripting, for example, manual tests. But when you go to API level, you start to test a bit different kind of things and violating a bit different kind of rules.
Okay, thanks. At least for me, you have given some new ideas. What do
Oh,
you
great.
consider to be the critical? Sorry. What do you consider to be the critical security test to be executed on a regular software release?
Well, in my dream world, let's say it that way, there would be quite many different levels. But of course, well, in my opinion, the best start would be that continuous integration pipeline is starting with the dependency checks, that the dependencies doesn't have much vulnerabilities. Because that's something which has caused the biggest data breaches in history. That some package is not upgraded and it has been vulnerable. And then, of course, this kind of easy to add logic testing would be something which I'd like to see there, because they are safeguarding that when developers doing changing, they are not disabling some important check accidentally. There has been cases when application has been evolved quite a lot, and suddenly someone realizes, okay, this everyone shouldn't have this data available, but suddenly they are because something has changed the application logic. And when you have these kind of tests safeguarding that part, it's good idea. And then, of course, if there could be scanning, static scanning, for example, to the code, then it would be nice to have. Then there's these dynamic scanners also, which would be cool. But at the end, the pipeline would be so long that it takes 2 weeks to run only the pipeline.
Okay. One question: how do you think like logical testing or logical security testing relates to OWASP model, which is more of a checklist?
Well, it could be one part of that checklist. It's not replacing it. It's some of these are already included there, if I remember correctly. I should open the OWASP top 10 there. But the checklist, it has same kind of issues. But I can't remember that there is, for example, violating the business rules so much. Usually it's like insecure access control, for example, when you can access to data where you shouldn't be, or you can bypass the access rights. So this is like part of that.
Okay. And how do you think security testing should be included into the development process? You talked about a little bit shifting left, but like how early it should start?
Well, in my opinion, I'd like that customer, when they have first requirements, or they have to start requirements or some kind of idea what they want, they come to talk with me, and I could start to discuss about security and privacy regulations and so on. Because usually the worst security or privacy violations comes from the basic business ideas. Like, for example, Facebook at past, when they put data to almost everyone who just decided to pay money. It was part of the business decision. It was not the technical rule. It was business rule. So when we start to think about security from the first phases, then we can include the security into the requirements, requests from the vendors that, okay, can you follow kind of security requirements like OWASP top 10 and add the security test automation, add the security checks to pipelines and so on. So earlier it starts, easier it gets.
Okay, I think that's it with the questions. So thank you for your presentation. At least for me, you gave a new perspective on API testing, and I got some tips and tricks. Please everyone remember to fill in the share tab to give us feedback, and visit our partners area to see what they are up to. And after that, it's short coffee break. Load up on coffee and be ready for our final keynote. See you then.